Hello, beautiful people. My name is Anthony. I'm a dungeon master, and I play Dungeons and Dragons every Wednesday. I thought now would be a good time to return to doing the DM diary, considering, well, we had just gotten back from a fairly lengthy hiatus, a few months. I needed a little bit of time to recharge my batteries, so in the meantime, we ran a few one-shots and had some fun. And I got a chance to play a little bit as opposed to just DMing all the time. And now, well, we're back at it again. Every Wednesday around 6:30 we get together and we play for a few hours. So we've come back from a hiatus. Part of that hiatus means one of our players kind of fell away from the game a little bit. So I'm down to 3 players on the regular now. And that's fine. Dan, Mark, and Tom are my players. And I will post their information on this video so that you can see what their character is and stuff. But they're relatively new players, or characters, I mean. And so they're not new players. They've all been playing for quite some time. But they are playing relatively new characters. So I thought now would basically be a great time to start doing this concurrently, as opposed to going back when remembering minute details becomes extremely difficult. So, I suppose, first off, I'll start off by saying kind of where we're at as far as the game is concerned. They were just run out of Solara, the capital city of the Empyrean Empire, on the continent of Helia, and they were sort of framed, I guess. Not even framed, really. There was no crime they were accused of. The king, because of reasons unknown to the party, which they'll watch this, I'm sure, so I'm not going to spoil it, but they were driven out of the city by the king. He had a hidden Warforged army that are Knights of the Crown, and they serve at his whim. And he utilized them to drive out some radical element from the city, which our brave adventurers were assisting with. And then he kind of turned on them, surprisingly enough. Announced that he had a secret court wizard that was helping him manufacture these Warforged by pulling the souls of fallen soldiers back from the void, and it's a whole thing. But that's not really, I mean, it is a little bit important, but just that background information right there is what's really important, because moving forward, we're kind of on an arc that has very little to do with that, other than they are on the run from the king. And so what I decided to do after our final session of our last, of the last little arc and moving forward is I decided to break the golden rule, as it were, and we started 1 week later, and I did a brief recap of what happened during the week and started them in an inn. Like every great cliche adventure hook story, they started out in an inn. Now, the 3 of them had been together for a little while, so there wasn't any adjustment period because they already knew each other from before our hiatus. So that's fine. But anyhow, I think it went pretty well. I set the scene. I feel like I set the scene. Obviously, every DM thinks that they're okay, at least. But regardless, I feel like I set the scene pretty well and described the tense atmosphere and build up over the week of them running from the city and winding up in an inn in a large farming community called Greenhaven. Now, Greenhaven is not so much a village because all of the farmhouses are spread very far apart. There are a lot of people in Solara, and these farms provide most of the food for the city. So, because of that, they have to have a lot of farmland. As such, all of the farms are very spread out. Anyhow, so they come to this little, basically a hostel, and there's an old dragonborn guy. His scales are worn down from, being old, and he's no longer got the youthful luster that a dragonborn would have. And he's nice-ish. He's a little bit curt, but they grab a couple of rooms, and the place is so unused and off the beaten path, as it were, that it doesn't even really have a name. But the three of them, they stay there for a day, and they wake up on the 36th day of the month of Winsella, which is springtime, essentially. And they take a seat and eat some bread and some cheese at the bar, and the door opens behind them, and they hear some metal clinking as a guy walks in, and they're accosted, essentially. Well, more like briefly asked a few questions by a half-elf, a very fetching-looking half-elf man, who is a bounty hunter. Now, I'd like to point out that while they know that they haven't really done anything wrong, there is a bounty out on them. And the king wants them returned to him alive if possible. So, the trouble with that is that my players are very direct in their actions. So when this guy comes in, and he's pretty cordial, he talks a little bit. I kind of know how to push my players' buttons a little bit. And I know they're not big on flowery, lengthy language that, as far as dialogue is concerned. They want their interactions to be straight to the point. And this guy, he talks a fair bit. And he talks, he says he's looking for three individuals who look remarkably like the three of them, and there's a bounty on them, and he, would like to just have them come with him peacefully and return to the city. So he walks over to the counter, and he addresses the Dragonborn bartender, I guess, is what you would call him in this. So innkeeper, I guess, I don't know. But he's like, hey, I'm parched. Get me something to drink, please. And, of course, the bartenders, he's kind of got a reputation for harboring people who are fleeing from justice. So the Dragonborn's like, no, I won't. I don't have anything for your kind here. Not meaning half-elves, but instead bounty hunters. So a little twist on the classic, we don't like your kind round these parts cliche. So anyhow, the half-elf kind of smiles because he was very much expecting that. And he says, he reaches into, he's wearing this long leather coat, and inside it's lined with chainmail. And he reaches in and he pulls out a big set of manacles from a hooked pocket on the inside of his long coat, and he sets them down and he slides them across a thing, and he, tells everybody again, hey, just come peacefully, this won't be a big deal. And so, of course, knowing my players, I knew they probably were not going to just give up and get arrested. Because, as it happens, I happen to know them pretty well, and also they have a sort of a mission. Tom's character, Dylan Pickleton, yes, that's right, Dill Pickleton, is trying to find his old adventuring troupe who have stated that they're having trouble with some undead spilling down from the Sword Shear Mountains, which is a large mountain range. Long time ago, a lich built a tower there. It was pretty crazy times. But anyhow, after he was defeated, all of the undead sort of started shambling around and doing their own thing. And now occasionally they spill down from the mountains, and relatively novice groups of adventurers, try to deal with it for some coin and experience. And Dylan was part of one of those troops. So he gets this letter, and so the group agrees to abscond with him towards the Sword Shear Mountains since they can't stay in the capital any longer anyway. So this half-elf guy puts the manacles on the table, and he's like, come on, let's, do this peacefully. And Mark's character, Tobik Blacksprocket, is a gnome artificer. And he is not a fan of being told what to do. He is very rebellious, and he really has his own way of doing pretty much everything. He's a little bit of a dick, but in a very good way. So when this happens, Mark tells me that he points his little handheld blunderbuss thing that artificers get through his cloak at the half-elf. And once the shackles come out, he just pulls the trigger. It blasts into the side of the half-elf, and then an altercation ensues, which isn't really an altercation because once the half-elf takes the shot, he gets up, wounded, but he's like, okay, come on, there's no need for the violence. Throughout this whole experience, this half-elf never draws a weapon, never makes any threats. He says, let's just come quietly, everything will be okay, and I'll tell them that you cooperated, and hopefully that'll grant you some leniency. And Tobik shoots him again, and then takes out a sword and spears him through the chest with it while he's laying on the ground with his brains all over the place. Just to make sure. So, technically I think that's murder, but it's a bounty hunter thing. Plus, there's no way that anyone will ever be able to prove that he murdered this guy because the fucking bartender's not going to tell anybody. He hates bounty hunters. So, they decide, okay, well, we should probably check the surroundings, so let's look out the windows and stuff and see if there's anybody around. And there are, in fact, some other bounty hunters outside that were part of that guy's kind of squad, waiting for an ambush in case the group doesn't come peacefully, which, they didn't. But they do notice that there's like a cloak billowing from behind a tree. So, of course, Dan's character, Barad, he's like this marksman, hotshot, he's got the French accent, and he's very cocksure of himself. So he goes upstairs and opens up a window, and he fires magic missiles. He's a Eldritch Knight. So he fires magic missiles around the tree, because apparently they always hit as long as you can see a little bit of whatever you're shooting at. And so he blasts them into this target. And I described to him a woman falling out in peasant clothing, a woman in peasant clothing falling out from behind the tree, and a man kind of like steps out as if he were holding her in his arms. And I painted it as a lover's tryst, and immediately he was like, oh crap. And then they embraced it. They just went full-on outlaw. Tobik kicks open the front door. First Mark asks me if Tobik can see the peasant man. I'm like, yes. He kicks open the door, uses his blunderbuss, and blows the dude back 10 feet. Luckily for them, they didn't know it at the time, but luckily for them, it was in fact a ruse by the mercenaries. They were two other mercenaries with the group, lookouts, basically. Trying to seem innocuous, but at the time, they had really felt like they were just embracing the outlaw stereotype, and as Mark put it, I believe he said, quote, "We're victims of the circumstance," and I thought that was very funny. It very much surprised me that they decided not to confirm the identity of these two individuals, but they got lucky. Still, though, it was fun to give them a little bit of a, oh crap, we just murdered innocent people jolt. But as a result of this, the bartender, who did think that they were innocent people, said, alright, you gotta get the hell out of here. They ask him where the back door is, he points them in the right direction, and then he goes and hides in a trap door that leads down to like a basement cellar. They they look out the back door. They see that some brush has been kind of transplanted for cover, and Barad shoots the guy with a firebolt through the brush. And then there's another guy up in the tree, and they can tell that these guys are not very well equipped, or what's the word? Experienced. They're kind of noobish. And these two individuals came for the bounty, but they're not affiliated with the other bounty hunters who are out front, or the elf who came into the inn. So these guys are just trying to cash in on what might have been an easy bounty after all of the group's resources had been depleted from the large, more experienced group of bounty hunters. They decide to let the two guys live, and they run through a wooded area up towards a hill. Now, this whole time, been painting the picture of there have been slight rumblings underground, like miniature earthquakes or something of that nature. Even before all of the combat and things started, I let them know that there was this thing going on, and even the bartender told them. So they're aware of this. But they make it to the top of the hill. They decide, all right, we'll wait here and ambush them, just like Obi-Wan versus Anakin. They had the high ground so they could chop their legs off and throw them in lava or something. Anyway, so they sit and they wait at the top of this grassy knoll, and eventually the bounty hunters come to the edge of the woods, and they're not stupid. So they realize that they no longer have the element of surprise. The enemy has the high ground. So most of them are like, fuck this, we're done. All right, we've obviously botched this. We'll either regroup and find another way to track these guys down, or these is just going to be a bounty that gets away. They seem pretty dangerous anyway. But their leader, who, it doesn't matter if I say this because he's dead now, was very much money starved. Him and his family were not doing so well as far as finances are concerned, was shouting at his mercenaries, his co-conspirators, to charge the hill because the payday would be worth it. And so Tobik decides to pinpoint, he makes a perception check to try to pinpoint which person is talking, who the leader is. He succeeds with a decent roll, and I point out, who the leader is to them. And he blows them away with his blunderbuss, which I really feel like I should revisit the idea of range when it comes to that. Anyway, it's not really an issue. We'll get to that. Anyhow, so he blows away this bounty hunter, mercenary leader guy, and he flies back into a tree dead. Everybody's like, okay, you guys are free to go. Somebody from the bounty hunters calls out. It's like, you're free to go, just, leave us alone. Of course, Tobik decides to pick off a couple of more people just to antagonize them because that's his style, and then they flee. They travel for a little while, break for food. They are city slickers, though, so they don't have any camping supplies. They don't have anything that will allow them to continue to survive. So they scavenge for food and do the best that they can. They use their decent stores of survival tools, rope and the like, to make a hammock and stuff like that. And so they rest for a little bit and eat, and then they travel, and then they prepare for sleep because it's starting to get dark. Nothing other than a few of those minor little earthquakes happen throughout the rest of the day. At night, however, as they're all resting, Tobik's companion, his mechanical companion, is a large mountain cat, a mechanical, mountain cat. So he stays sentry all night, or she stays sentry all night, and wakes them all up as the ground erupts underneath them from what appears to be an earthquake but isn't. And a boulette comes crashing out of the ground, and on top of the boulette is a myconid. Now, it's nighttime, so the myconid is not affected by his sun sickness, which is good. And the myconid riding the boulette sort of... They don't have a particularly hostile stance towards the group, but the group prepares just in case. And then another sinkhole appears, and another boulette comes out, but this one has an Umber Hulk riding it. And both the boulette and Umber Hulk pair have this corrupted, undead sort of appearance to them. Parts of their chitinous armor are like sloughing away, and there's like this purplish green liquid oozing out of like what appear to be basically open rotting wounds, and they do not look particularly good. So the myconid uses its ability to shoot spores out in a 60-foot range and make everyone essentially linked through telepathy. And since myconids can't speak, they more so convey through thought, and pleads for them to help him defeat this enemy. They jostle with the idea of maybe just saying fuck it and leaving them to fight it out on their own until their what's the word? Mercenary nature takes a back step to their decision to maybe try to do some good, and they make up for that indecision at first by throwing in with the myconid and his boulette and fighting against the corrupted and undead Umber Hulk and boulette. Now, this was awesome. I am a huge fan of myconids, and I've never been able to find a way to use them before. So I was very excited that they didn't throw me any curveballs so curvy that this encounter never happened. I guess I could have probably forced it to happen, but that's not really my style as a DM. So I was glad that they essentially kind of did everything that I was hoping they would do this session. But it still ended in a somewhat unsatisfactory manner, and we'll get to that now. So they decide to engage the Umber Hulk and its mount, and together the two of them focus mostly on fighting the myconid and its boulette, but Tobik and his mechanical companion get pretty close to the enemy boulette. Now, as a group, they decided to focus down the Umber Hulk because if you take out the rider, it increases the likelihood of the mount being less effective, or at least there's the perception of that. So they focus most of their attacks on the Umber Hulk, and they slowly begin whittling it down. What I did was I took the Umber Hulk and the boulette from the Monsters Manual, and I retooled them a little bit. I gave them more health because they're undead, but I gave them a much less AC. Now, the Umber Hulk, for those who don't know, has an ability called Confusing Gaze, and the party can choose to avert their gaze and take, disadvantage on all of the appropriate things, or they can attempt to not do that and make a charisma saving throw or else be confused. Now, I thought that would be an interesting little curveball to throw them, as opposed to just doing shitloads of damage. The problem is that they rolled super poorly for probably the first half of the fight. Most of the damage early on was done by the myconid and his boulette. And, oh man, I was starting to get super nervous. I tooled down the damage a little bit when actually by about half, when I, wrote down all the statistics for the monsters and the Myconid and the Boulette and the Umber Hulk and all that. So I cut their damage down pretty significantly because the party is level 8 right now, and there's 3 of them, but they don't really have a main healer, and they don't really have a tank. So I thought their engagement process, since all 3 of them are ranged, is going to be a little bit more tactile, which it was. Except the problem is, and we get back to this, Tobik and his pet decided to get pretty close to that Boulette. Now, how I had retooled the Boulette was I gave it slightly more health, maybe 15 or 17 more health, and I reduced its AC from 17 down to 14, which I thought was a decent exchange. But I gave it the ability to swallow people. Now, the regular Boulette doesn't have that capability, but I imagined that these corrupted undead Boulettes and the Umber Hulk, with all this pooling, like the cesspool of this purplish green liquid, was like acidic and poisonous in nature and would dissolve things. And so an undead Boulette would make use of that by swallowing things, and because Boulettes by nature, or even undead ones, they love eating stuff and they'll eat anything. So I thought maybe an undead one, especially with a Umber Hulk. Oh shit. Sorry. Especially with an Umber Hulk. I don't know why that just happened. With an Umber Hulk on top, would probably instruct it to swallow things, given their size. So, that's what I ended up having it do, is there's a strength saving throw when it successfully bites something, but it doesn't do it every time. I wasn't going to punish them with a mechanic they were unfamiliar with. So I made sure that the first thing it decided to swallow was Kulta, Tobik's pet, and not one of them. A pet can be rebuilt or replaced, but a character, not so much. They get close. Tobik and Kulta get close to this Boulette. The Boulette grabs, swallows, and dissolves Kulta pretty quickly. And it was just rolls. Luck of the rolls. It was like I was on fire this Wednesday, and they were the very opposite of that. They were doused in the most non-flammable liquid you can find, because holy crap. So the Boulette critically strikes and swallows Kulta. They do enough damage to the Umber Hulk to kill it. I make the undead fortitude save thing. It fails. The Umber Hulk dies. They're excited by this, and yeah, boy. They're pretty excited by this, and they should be, because they just defeated the Umber Hulk, and they thought, okay, the Boulette should be relatively easy, now that it doesn't have a rider. But because it didn't have a rider guiding it, and it was undead, I decided to roll randomly to see who it would attack. And it chose Tobik. It charged towards him and bit him, and I rolled a natural 20. Now, I am a big believer in trying to keep things tense, but also fair. I probably could have fudged the roll and not said anything. I could have said, unfortunately it charges towards you and it misses you. But before I had given it enough thought, I said, ooh. Just that little exclamation was more than enough for my players to know that I had rolled a natural 20. Because I'm pretty sure Dan said, ooh, natural 20, right after I went, oof. And then the cat was out of the bag. I didn't have the opportunity to fix the problem before it became a problem. So I said yes. It did 40 damage to him, swallowed him, and he went unconscious. Now, when you're in the boulette's stomach, the acid does damage to you at the start of every turn. You can do damage to the boulette from the inside to try to get it to vomit you up, or you can make a strength check to try to force your way out of its mouth. That's not going to happen with a gnome whose highest stat is intelligence, so he goes unconscious inside, takes a bunch of damage, fails a death saving throw, dies a couple turns after. I felt bad, as I always do when one of my players dies. I don't like that. It keeps the world realistic and dramatic and tense, and I would never ever remove the possibility of death because I think that cheats the players out of a sense of victory when they overcome a difficult obstacle. So, he died. And I felt like crap. And he did a really good job of just ever so slightly twisting the knife every once in a while and making me feel even worse. But that's Mark's style. And he said that he didn't, it's not my fault, it's just how the dice were. Which is true, but I still feel bad because everybody gets attached to their characters. Hell, I loved Tobik. He was this smart mouth, asshole gnome engineer who has like a New York accent, like a real thick, hey, I'm walking here kind of thing going, and I just loved him. He was fun to DM for. He was a character that was full of life. And now he's dead. So Mark and I have to discuss how we're going to approach his next character in the future, which I believe he has a pretty good handle on. He used Xanathar's guide to everything and rolled a bunch of the tables randomly in order to determine what his character is going to be. Now, Mark is usually the type of guy who looks for a decently powerful build and then builds a story around it. But this time, he didn't do that. And I'm very, very pleased with that. It's not that I have anything against min-maxers or anything like that. I think everybody should enjoy the game in the way that they find it enjoyable. But there's something kind of special, something that I find very unique about someone who decides to throw all that shit out the window and says, okay, I am going to just let the dice tell me what to do. To me, that is a very unique and interesting quality, and something that not everybody can do. Most people have the urge to sort of nudge their character growth or decision-making in a certain direction based on their own desires. And so, I guess we'll see how this turns out. He rolled a pretty good stat line. He rolled before everybody left. I think he has 2 15s, 2 14s, a 13, and a 10, something like that. So he's got a pretty decent stat line, and that's before any racial modifiers, etc. And, yeah, I'm pretty excited to see how this all turns out. That being said, I still feel bad that his character died, but he is a little bit less of a problem now. See, I made the mistake of saying, yeah, sure, use whatever you want, Unearth Arcana, blah, blah, blah. And now, most people say, alright, well, the Artificer is crap, it's not optimized well, and it doesn't scale well into late game, and blah, 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 blah. And all of that shit doesn't matter if your guy is obsessed with creating things that he knows about in real life, which is like railroads and clock towers, and just throws the whole medieval thing right out the fucking window. But that's his prerogative, since I was the dumbass who was like, yeah, go ahead, you can play him. So, but now that he's dead, I don't have to worry about that quite so much anymore. But yeah, so what I'm going to do, what I'd like to do, is I have the recording. We record pretty much all of our games. And so I'm going to unlist, I'll upload the audio of that, and I'll mark it as unlisted, and I'll put the link to it in the description of this video, so that if you're interested in actually listening to the session that we had, warning, we swear a lot, we're assholes, much like most D&D tables, I think. This is a homebrew campaign. I've made all the gods, all of the everything, the world, and all of that shit. So, I'm not super rules concerned. So if you're one of those people who's like, Boulettes shouldn't be able to do this, and Umber Hulks shouldn't be able to be undead, and all of that stuff. I'm sorry. You'll probably be really disappointed throughout the course of this series because I do what I want, as Cartman would say. And, yeah. But I will post that in the description down below. And if, for some strange reason, people are interested in my campaign world, I have a big PDF with everything you basically need to know, including the starting hook that we went with way, way back a year ago when we started this campaign. And, yeah. You're all beautiful people. Have a good day, and don't be a dick.